Seek ye the truth, and the truth will make you free, and nothing else will do it. Jesus Christ has never lied to anybody. Why won't you listen to him?
And man will either worship the one true God, or man will worship a lie.
You must stay away from people who will not document as fact what they put in their articles. That's why my broadcast scares the hell out of socialists. That's why I was named as the most dangerous radio host in America, because I shoot documented facts which cannot be refuted. That's what's dangerous. Don't spread a rumor. Spread the truth. Document it. Prove it. Make it irrefutable, and you too will become dangerous.
It's time to speak out. Speak out. Speak out.
Tweet it, blog it, Facebook it.
Shout it out to your neighbors and tell everyone you know.
You see, what happens when you broadcast the truth is you piss everybody off.
Faith is resistance.
Greetings, everybody. It's Armor of Truth Live, number 425. We're doing the Art Bell shift for you tonight. Talking about America First with teeth. It's got skin on it. It's got legs, I guess. You can decide for yourself. Trump administration released their national security strategy. I'll explain what all that is as we move on through this, but let's waste no time and dive right in. Just by saying, first of all, that President Trump has once again angered globalists, the progressivists. Late in the evening on December 4th, White House released a document titled The National Security Strategy of the United States of America. That's what it looks like. Right here. Dated November 2025. The NSS, the National Security Strategy, we'll be referring to it as the NSS throughout this show. This is the Trump administration's official foreign policy statement for at least the next 3 years, and presumably would be the policy of a 2028 J.D. Vance campaign or whoever within the Trump inner circle decides they might want to run. Whoever is MAGA, I guess you could say. So what is a national security strategy? A national security strategy is a statement of the United States official foreign policy, priorities, positions, and goals. Typically, it's written and released by a presidential select committee at some point during their first year in office. A national security strategy represents a summary of how the current commander-in-chief views the world and intends to guide the nation's economic, diplomatic, and military, etc., engagement with other nations. It's a big deal. Now, the Trump administration's national security strategy for 2025 is built on 4 pillars of vital national interests. And we're going to hit all of these tonight. I'm going to make the case for you. I'm going to present a case for you, and you can decide for yourself whether it is ethical, necessary, and ultimately, most importantly, is it biblical? Is this how a government is supposed to act? This is what a government is supposed to be doing. So, 4 pillars this national security strategy is based on. Number 1, protect the homeland, the American people, and the American way of life. Now, those bear some definitions, right? What is the American way of life? What is the homeland? Those things are pretty simple, but what is the American way of life? Number 2, promote American prosperity. Number 3, preserve peace through strength. That is really the theme of the entire strategy. Peace through strength. Number 4, advance American influence. Advance American influence. Also a big point. Now, in summary, Trump's official foreign policy position is America first. And that's the question we're really asking here tonight. Is America first biblical? Is the idea of recovering and ensuring America's internal security and prosperity by diverting resources and attention away from the drain of progressive policies that further global collectivism, and by returning the United States to respectful regional dominance by championing the doctrine of peace through strength. So the question you want to think about, because the criticism that you'll hear is that this is an imperialist operation or project, that it's racist and white nationalist, Christian nationalist even, they'll say. You decide for yourself. Of course, now those progressivists who favor globalism are not so happy with this idea. For example, the Atlantic's Elliot Cohen. Yes, the Atlantic. Check this out. Yeah, there it is. Incoherent babble. He minced no words in characterizing this NSS as incoherent babble. Thesaurus at hand. Cohen lambasts the text of the national security strategy as bombast, sycophancy, lies, inconsistencies, and gross self-contradictions. Now, it is my opinion that Elliot Cohen simply flouted any expectation of journalistic integrity when he denigrates the national security strategy's primary author, who is Trump National Security Advisor, or was. He came in to the administration particularly to help write this policy. His name is Michael Anton. Elliot Cohen said that Michael Anton's work reads like a babble of thrashing sleeper, like the babble of a thrashing sleeper who alternates between fantasy-laden dreams and cold sweat nightmares. Well, typical for the Atlantic these days are these graceless rants of lowbrow cranks and provocateurs. That's about all you find over there now. Truly not to be taken seriously. But Cohen, in harmony with a plethora of other contemporary grumblers and progressivist meddlers, reveals exactly who he is and who he works for in the following quote. And he says, once upon a time, these documents were drafted by intellectuals such as Henry Kissinger and Zbigniew Brzezinski. Right? Kissinger and Brzezinski. Let's see, what have we heard from these guys before? Well, Zbigniew Brzezinski wrote the book Between Two Ages, America's Role in the Technocratic Era. He said the technocratic era involves the gradual appearance of a more controlled society. Such a society would be dominated by an elite, unrestrained by traditional values. Soon it will be possible to assert almost continuous surveillance over every citizen and maintain up-to-date complete files containing even the most personal information about the citizen. These files would be subject to instantaneous retrieval by the authorities, of course. He goes on in the book to say, in the technotronic society, the trend would seem to be towards the aggregation of the individual support of millions of uncoordinated citizens, easily within the reach of magnetic and attractive personalities, exploiting the latest communications techniques to manipulate emotions and control reason. Right, Elliot Cohen. These are the intellectuals we would like to be listening to. Not only that, what is Henry Kissinger noted for saying, yeah, the elderly are useless eaters. These are the intellectuals we should be listening to, for sure. Here's another Heinz Kissinger quote. Who controls the food supply controls the people. Who controls the energy can control whole continents. Who controls money can control the world. Right? Who controls the food supply controls the people, right? This is a very thoughtful strategy, right? Control oil, and you control nations. Control food, and you control people. Not only that, let's check one last one from Henry Kissinger. Depopulation should be the highest priority of foreign policy towards the third world. And he lived it out, running that campaign of abortion throughout India, for example. Sold, of course, as birth control, as a thoughtful, as a good deed. Because the U.S. economy will require large and increasing amounts of minerals from abroad, especially from less developed countries. And we should just take them. In fact, we should get rid of the people so we can get their stuff. How's that sound? So these are the intellectuals that Elliot Cohen at The Atlantic believes we should be listening to. And he goes on to say that Kissinger and Brzezinski were both notably refugee immigrants. And that's what gives them credibility, that they're immigrants. He says about them, the reports they produced were reasoned, sometimes anodyne, but usually consistent, thoughtful, and historically formed. Right? Yeah, depopulation. Right? Thoughtful. Well, I won't argue that they're consistent, but thoughtful. Reasoned. Now, what does he say about Trump's national security strategy? Again, written by Michael Anton, a conservative think tanker. Well, about Trump's strategy, he says, this NSS seems to have been put together by lickspittles. That's a new word for me. Lickspittles. With literary aspirations, but no discernible literary skills. Ah, yes. Brzezinski and Kissinger. Producers of such measured and thoughtful expressions as useless eaters. Talking about his fellow humanity, of course. Those are surely the good guys, right? You can disagree with Michael Anton's conservative policy ideas. That's okay. You can debate those ideas. But it's nothing short of childish, peevish malice to frame what he's written here as babble. I've read a few things from Michael Anton, a couple of them today. And again, you might disagree with some of his points, but it's definitely not babble. But it's not difficult these days to identify those ones who either hate America or serve their bellies, at the expense of their own best interests. They want to live for now, get everything they can. So they'll say whatever they need to. Who is Michael Anthony? In 2016, Michael Anton showed clearly where he stood on the value of American liberty, suggesting that after 8 years of disaster under Barack Obama, this was back when Trump was running for president in 2016, after 8 years of hell under Barack Obama, an election of Hillary Clinton would lead to the utter destruction of the United States. Now, who would you trust to tell you the truth on a matter like maintaining the sovereignty and safety of the American people? Just think about it. So this new national security strategy did not miss the opportunity to drop some truth bombs about some of our oldest allies who have drifted so far from the project of individual liberty, advocating for the destruction of their own society, as to be almost unrecognizable from their recent post-communist faces. A CBS reporter summed up the national security strategy. Like this. This might be a little too long, but let's see what it is.
Remarkably, the gathering of world leaders is happening the morning after. This explosive 33-page document was quietly released
Not
by
32,
the White House. In the pages,
not 34.
A warning for Europe, saying Europeans face civilization erasure. Those words found in the president's national security strategy. He's branded as, quote, a roadmap to ensure America remains the greatest and most successful nation in human history and the home of freedom on earth. So let's go live to CBS News White House reporter Willie James Inman. Willie, the words in that document, especially the words potential civilization erasure, are pretty direct.
I got to stop. Erasure? Does anybody see a Z in that word? Is that, oh, I get it. I'm not an intellectual. I say erasure, so I'm a rube from the sticks of North Cackalack, I guess. Anyway.
Correct here. So explain the document and the reason behind those assertions.
Hey there, Reed. Good to be with you. Well, this document is typically what the White House will release to outline the president's global national security strategy. And in large part, it focuses on varying parts of the world. But the president, the White House, in this document, sparing no words, mincing no words with Europe and some of America's oldest allies. And you mentioned it there that the continent potentially faces civilization erasure, potentially in the decades to come. In large part, the document outlines because of unchecked immigration and the erasure of democratic principles such as free speech. Now, it's noteworthy that this is perhaps no surprise when you listen to what officials, including the president, the vice president, have said publicly. But putting pen to paper and quietly releasing this document, it really solidifies the White House's approach to foreign policy. But that document also outlines that America stands ready to help Europe correct ship, so to speak. I'm just going to read what it says, that the document says that Europe remains strategically and culturally vital to the United States, and that America's goal should be to help Europe correct its current trajectory. So certainly some.
All right, so the assumption here in the national security strategy, by the way, you can add your own heaping helping of sarcasm to this recap, especially the intro, but CBS has long since appropriated the same carping and patronizing tone as its mainstream media colleagues. That's for sure the days of old Walter Cronkite. They've gone the way of the buffalo, my friends. So you heard that, though, right? Really, the conclusion, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about what they say about Europe here. But the summary of it all was basically is, look, we love Europe. America was founded by Europeans, not Somalians, just in case you were confused by that. But the sentiment here is, look, we love the European people. We want to help them if we can to prevent them from falling into this utopia that the EU has planned for them. Well, the fact of the matter is that the text of Trump's national security strategy expels decades of globalist foreign policy since the end of World War II that were status quo. And very much so since at least the collapse of the Soviet Union, which of course then almost immediately we had the communist infiltration of the United States, filtering out into, among other places, the universities, and the churches. This is where we get the social gospel and the earliest, the earliest, not the earliest. We had in the 30s there was some Soviet Marxist infiltration, but then after World War II, see, we were allies with the Soviet Union in some of these wars. But then after that, they sought to bring us down from within. In fact, that has been the strategy and still is the strategy of all of America's enemies. because we're too powerful to bring down with force. So they will rot you from within. Demoralization, separate you from God. Then it's easy to destabilize your nation. And then you create the crisis, or the crises, or take advantage of them as they come up. And very soon you've normalized the situation. So Trump's national security strategy makes clear that United States foreign policy, at least under this president, will reverse course from decades of globalist infiltration. That's what they're saying. Now, this is really nothing new. This shift was present in Trump's earliest addresses after the 2024 election, when he said, you remember he was standing there in the Capitol building, giving that address, and he was flanked by the likes of the Clintons and the Obamas and the Bushes. He said, "We have a government that has given unlimited funding to the defense of foreign borders." Not a good thing, is what he was saying. So this new NSS boldly establishes a new era where the days of the U.S. being taken advantage of by a cadre of pseudo-communist elites who see the U.S. as a tool for realizing their designs of a progressivist world order are now over. Now take that as you will. That's just what it says. Now, to answer those who will cast shade on the strategy as being imperialist, the text of the document plainly stipulates that the only reason under this national security strategy, under this foreign policy statement, it says the only reason that the U.S. would intervene in the affairs of another country would be if that country actively threatened America's sovereignty, the safety of the American people, or America's national interests abroad. Another criticism is that it mentions and seems to be reviving key commitments of the Monroe Doctrine. This national security strategy says, quote, "Our own hemisphere is the new defense and foreign policy priority." Not the whole world, but just the people around us, our hemisphere. That particular change is labeled in the document as the Trump corollary to the original Monroe Doctrine. Here's this is written by Lyndon LaRouche back in the day, Monroe Doctrine today. He says, up to the present date, John Quincy Adams remained the most significant of the architects of what might be fairly distinguished as the working foreign policy of the United States of America, although he was already distinguished as a diplomat before joining President Monroe's cabinet. His mature genius is typified by three of his leading roles in designing our government's approach to its foreign policies, beginning his part as Secretary of State under President James Monroe, during his role as President of the United States, and in a later role he conducted, less conspicuously but with powerful force of influence, as a member of the U.S. House of Representatives. Throughout this, the leading features of that expressed genius included his foresight and contributions respecting the role of diplomacy in defining future coast-to-coast, north-south borders of the U.S., and in crafting of U.S. policy toward the other states of the Americas. Three model precedents. The first is what became known as the Monroe Doctrine of defense of the sovereignty of the emerging states of the Americas against meddling by both the British monarchy and the Continental Holy Alliance powers. That would be your Vatican connection. And the second is the parts played by respecting U.S. policy toward Mexico by his Secretary of State Henry Clay and Ambassador to Mexico Joel Poinsett, And the third is typified by his association with a distinguished U.S. representative and later president, as expressed by Abraham Lincoln's spot resolution against President Polk's Dick Cheney-like launching of an unlawful war against Mexico. It was notably President Lincoln's leadership to victory in the U.S. war against that tool of Jeremy Bentham's Lord Palmerston and Napoleon III, known as the Confederacy, which led to the expulsion of France's imperial forces from Mexico, and to President Benito Juarez's restoration of Mexico's freedom through the defeat of the fascist-like occupying Habsburg predator known as the Emperor Maximilian. I'll finish here. On these matters of U.S. foreign policy, since LaRouche's 1977 attack on the late Walter Lippmann's fraudulent Fabian's misrepresentation of the Monroe Doctrine, my publicly stated policy as a Democratic presidential candidate, this is LaRouche speaking again, toward all the states of the Americas has been grounded explicitly and consistently on those precedents of Adams, as complemented by the work of his collaborators Clay, Poinsett, and Lincoln. Okay. So what do these things have in common? Trump's plan is neither to join the Bushes in spreading democracy, like these forever wars, spreading democracy around the world with bombs, through global war on terror. Trump's plan is not that. And it's not to disrupt the internal affairs of any peaceful nation, but rather to restore the United States to the preeminence it once held in the Western Hemisphere through internal strength, with America First policies meant to empower the American people. First, and you might remember, we've talked about on this show, that jives with biblical principles of charity, where a man is responsible to his own household first before he goes to give. You don't go and raise the neighbor's kids and leave your kids to fend for themselves. You don't give away all your money to causes because it makes you look good in the public and leave your own family suffering. The Bible says he that doesn't take care of his own first is worse than an unbeliever. That can also apply to the leader of a nation whose house is the nation and whose people are his citizens. Now, global elites are obviously not pleased with this, right? That's clearly going to be the case. Continuing in their habit of bloviating and stirring up fear to divert the people from reality, so-called journalists fomented angst in their framing of this security strategy, suggesting that Trump is a threat to democracy. We would like for them to define what they mean by democracy. I think it's clear what they mean by democracy is Fabian socialism. And they also said he's planning a takeover of London and the EU. I'm not kidding. That's what it says here. Here's the Guardian's version. Lays bare Trump's support for Europe's far right. If you disagree with them, you are far right. Now, there's the crew. So, anyway, also the Financial Times article. Right, oh, here you go. The Great Replacement Theory. This is the one of the key points. This 33-page exposition of Trump's America First worldview appears to espouse the racist Great Replacement Theory, saying several countries risk becoming majority non-European and European faces. The real and stark prospect of civilizational erasure, it adds. Should present tense continue, the continent will be unrecognizable in 20 years or less. So the question we must ask then, is that true? Is that happening? Is that possible? What do you see? What do you think? What's going on in Europe today? We've tried to show you some of that here lately. Also, here from projectsyndicate.org, just kind of repeating the narrative. They call the national security strategy here ethno-national. That means white nationalism. They say the United States' new national security strategy is a tissue of populist ideology that reflects no understanding of the real challenges facing the country and views the main threat as liberal democracy itself. You have a hard time figuring out how they ever came to that conclusion if you read this document. It says the result will be bad for most Americans and their European allies. How's that? How's that? By stemming the tide of Muslim migrants? That's going to be bad for America? But it's going to be good for racists and authoritarian powers, especially Russia and China. The document speaks in opposite terms. The once venerable, now infamous New York Times chimed in, producing outright slanderous hyperbole here of the strategy, calling Trump's strategy racist and white nationalist again, chiming in with that. Now, to call this strategy, which I've summarized for you already, with those 4 points, it's about internal security. That's how we become strong again. It's a pro-worker, pro-middle class. They want to empower and expand the middle class. And that's what America was made for. So they call that racist. Now, let's assume that it is racist. Are we then to assume that Black, Hispanic, and Pacific Islanders hate liberty? Odd, isn't it? How tens of millions of people from many non-white ethnicities around the world have flooded into America in recent years. How white nationalists of them, right? It makes you wonder, who was behind the 2 or 3 or more assassination attempts on Trump? Look, I know. It looked weird, right? Butler, Pennsylvania. It looked weird. Okay, I'm with you. I get it. There are constant psyops these days, no doubt. But sometimes they actually do assassinate a guy. Charlie Kirk. Well, the reason they're crowing so loudly, here's another one from Le Monde. The Trump administration took the extraordinary step of weighing in on domestic policies of its European allies. Like, you should not do that. It is not your place to comment on Europe. Across the EU and London, reactions remain muted to avoid deepening an already growing rift. I don't think it's muted. I think we're reading it out very clearly here. Of course, in the document, it praised, as it says here, the rise of, quote, patriotic European parties located on, once again, the far right, there's your dog whistle alert, of the political spectrum, likely to cultivate resistance to Europe's current trajectory. Well, yeah, that's the idea. The continent was further described as one whose economic decline is eclipsed by the real and more stark prospect of civilizational erasure, right? That's how you're supposed to say it, I think. I learned something today. It's erasure, right? Whatever. Well, the reason they're acting out like this, and the reason, maybe they wanted to take him out, they knew this was going to happen. They knew that this was coming, and they knew that he would try this. And they could not afford many more setbacks in their project for a global socialist utopia. They've tried everything to prevent this day from coming. They worked like busy beavers to mock, defame, and jail the man for 4 whole years. They convicted him. Actually got convictions on 34 felonies. 34 felonies. That's not normal. Something is different here. Back to the NSS. Look at this right here. Look at another headline here. EPC.EU, Trump's new national security strategy, an existential threat to Europe. If you read the document, it is very clear. I just read it for you, right? The policy is we will not engage or intervene or involve ourselves in any other country's business as long as that country's activities don't threaten the American people or American national interests. Could it be that Europe falling and becoming a Muslim stronghold, London, UK becoming a Muslim stronghold, could that be bad for American interests? Yeah, here's the New York Times with their fish wrapper. Same stuff. They call it racist. They call it far right. But the text of the strategy reveals a plan to strengthen the American middle class. How? Through strong economic policies that will empower American workers. The document seems to understand that what makes America strong is its middle class. The other side seems to understand very clearly that the way you bring down America is to destroy its middle class. Who is being affected more by the fentanyl crisis? By the flood of not drugs, but weaponized poisons into the United States. It's the middle class. If you look at some of the videos, and I think Summer and I are very interested in bringing to you some of those stories of these families that have been affected by, Maduro and his international hub for all of America's enemies, international enemies, China, Russia, various terrorist groups in the Middle East. That Maduro has facilitated a lot of what is coming through into America through the migration invasion and also through this influx of deadly poisons. But the strategy is clear. As the text reads, the American worker is first. The American worker first is the point of all of our national security policy. So that's far right. To make the American people the focus of all of our policy, including our foreign policy, that we can't have that, especially not if you're a Fabian. The strategy seeks engagement with other nations, not through war or continental military alliances, but through major economic deals with foreign countries as long as they benefit Americans. You might say, how selfish? How stupid would it be to make deals with people that harm you? But that's what they think you should do. That's because they realize that their project for a one-world, globalist, socialist utopia can't be realized as long as America is standing there and has any strength at all. So there is nothing in the strategy about how we need to take over this and take over that. Remember the PNAC, the Project for a New American Century, that was sort of worked as George Bush's national security strategy, his foreign policy, literally said we need something like a new Pearl Harbor to get everybody behind this global war on terror that we want to start. And then very soon after that, the towers fell. I'm just saying. There it is. But anyway, sometimes you got to have a strong military. That's how this works. And sometimes violence is biblically justified. And Trump has chosen to do battle with the drug and human trafficking cartels in our own hemisphere, like the document says, namely Venezuelan dictator and global crime boss Nicolas Maduro and the financiers who fund the flow of deadly poisons posing as drugs that are and have been for many years now poisoning and killing over 200 Americans per day. Far, far more deadly than the scam damn it or the damn skim it. You know what I'm saying, right? C-19. Here's another important quote from Strategy. It says, quote, after the end of the Cold War, American foreign policy elites convinced themselves that permanent American domination of the entire world was in the best interest of you, the American people. Yet, the affairs of other countries are our concern only if their activities threaten our interests, is what this strategy says. They placed hugely misguided and destructive bets on globalism and so-called free trade that hollowed out the very middle class and industrial base on which American economic and military preeminence depend. That just sounds like some truth. That sounds accurate to me. It continues. It says they lashed or tied American policy to a network of international institutions, multilateral institutions like the United Nations, some of which are driven by outright anti-Americanism, and many by a transnationalism that explicitly seeks to dissolve individual nation-state sovereignty. Again, is that not just the truth? But protecting the people of the United States is the Constitution's mandate, and that means protecting them from military attack and hostile foreign influence, whether espionage, predatory trade practices, drug and human trafficking, destructive propaganda. I'm looking at you, European Union. Influence operations, cultural subversion, or any other threat to our nation, unquote. That's just what it says. Keeps going. Tightly controlled legal immigration, a strong military, free from the juvenile influence of wokeism and men in skirts, to once again be a respected force on the world stage as the dominant military power. Does that sound unreasonable? That we would like to not have any more men in skirts in our military? I mean, please. I thought we were over this. This also makes it possible to build up America's broken down infrastructure, and it is. Bridges are falling apart all over the nation. Also, how do we do this? We need more nuclear power stations, an electric grid that isn't supplied and dependent upon an anti-American communist nation that would like to see us fall. China, who could, since they manufacture all of our biggest transformers that take 18 months at least to replace if they go out. Yeah, so China could either shut down our largest, most critical transformers through a strategically placed back door that's in the system, or simply delay or refuse to replace them and manufacture them if and when a catastrophe strikes. This is how the founders imagined America. Independent, prosperous, not entangled in foreign conflicts that we have no real stake in. So I've read through the strategy 2 times in full, and then I've gone back and looked at pieces of it again. My takeaway is that it's really not typical political posturing. It's definitely not bowing down to globalist elites, the multilateral institutions like the UN and the WHO, international central banks and their Geneva-based Tower of Babel, who want a new borderless brotherhood of man where the state is God and families are anathema. It's not more of the same. More of the same that we saw, for instance, in the Bush, Clinton, well, the first Bush, Clinton, Bush, W. Bush, and then Obama, whose foreign policy strategy, their national security strategy, was really about justifying sending hundreds of billions of dollars of American citizens' tax dollars to fund this global project that is bent on removing Western civilization from any influence so that the WEF and a small cadre of European elites can bring on their great reset and build their one world order over which they will rule with total authority. So we're the racists, whatever that's supposed to mean. As if black folks don't love America. What in the world? Now, of course, it's not a perfect doctrine. Trump's not a perfect guy. He irks me a lot. But it is a stark departure from what we've become used to since the end of World War II, which is a world guilted and shamed into submission by the UN and others. What it is, it's a framework for recapturing the America that we all talk about missing so much. The America that is really only seen in lecture halls as a footnote in history. What it is a recovery of the founders' vision of American liberty. But this doesn't just happen. This is just a statement. It's just a particular doctrine of foreign policy, how we want to go about this. There are many obstacles to getting this to happen, for this to come to fruition. And one of them is the American people, because Americans are required to buy into this idea, because if we don't, none of this is possible. None of it's possible without the American people backing and realizing the ideas outlined in the strategy, which will require rebuilding the world's preeminent, most advanced, and prosperous economy, is our key focus. And that requires commitment to leading the world in many areas, which include scientific and technological advancements. We should be on top in those areas because we can. It's good. It's good stewardship of God's good gifts. How do we secure our sovereignty and liberty? Well, the National Security Strategy of November 2025 repeats the answer to this question, how do we secure our sovereignty, many times. The answer, by rebuilding our economy to insulate it from international speculators and multinational Geneva gangsters. Again, another quote from the National Security Strategy says, we have to reshore major industries. That means we have to bring our businesses that left here, that were forced out because of taxes and crazy regulations. We have to bring our industries back to America, our critical supply chains and our defense industrial base, and create energy dominance in oil and nuclear systems. We have to look out for ourselves. That doesn't mean we don't take care of other people too, but we can't take care of anybody else unless we're strong. But that's an essential element of American sovereignty. And as the primary author of the National Security Strategy, Michael Anton, has expressed in this National Security Strategy, it is the first step toward a true national security, which would be defined as an America decoupled from the New World Order. Now, here's some good news. Guess what's missing from the strategy? Guess what's missing from this document? Guess what isn't mentioned in here one time? Here's the contents. Well, what's never mentioned in here one time is climate change, carbon scams. Again, the guilt and shame that the Geneva cult foists on Americans and the West through climate hysteria marketing campaigns. It's not there. No mention of it whatsoever. That's right. The Sustainable Development Goals are utterly absent from this national security strategy. And I say good riddance. Now, that doesn't mean that they don't still exist, and there are still a very powerful group of global Marxists, essentially, who want them implemented. Now, let's move on to talking about American culture. And again, the guilting and shaming from the radical blue-haired leftists demanding that we shift our way of life to assimilate ourselves to the mass presence of ideologies and religions like Islam. Cultures that are antithetical to American culture and our traditions of liberty and personal responsibility, ideals that are unique to our constitutional republic. So this also serves the goal of national security, right? Bringing our culture back, solidifying our culture again, is also important for national security. By ending billions of dollars being doled out to illegitimate migrants, people who are not really asylum seekers or who really didn't come here because they were forced out, but because they took advantage of a years-long project where your tax dollars were used to fund non-governmental organizations that funneled people from cultures the most antithetical to American tradition cultures right into the United States. And why? To weaken us from within. Many, not all, but many of those migrants who were flooded in came here just to receive the benefits without committing to the duties and the personal sacrifice that American freedom requires. So once again, the foundation of national security in the United States is a large, strong, gainfully employed, prosperous, and confident, culturally coherent middle class. And I would say there must be a Christian consensus. This nation cannot survive under the form of a constitutional republic, under our Constitution, unless there is a Christian consensus. So this new strategy looks to honor our traditions and our grounding in virtue, and intends to facilitate this by empowering workers like us, like most of you, I'm sure, to be free from the unnecessary and draining influence of progressivist con men who are taking our pay, our salaries, our money, through endless taxation in the name of social justice, saving the planet, false promises of global socialism and technocracy. Again, the text of the actual strategy says, quote, "We want an America that cherishes its past glories and its heroes." So we don't want to be tearing down statues anymore. We don't want those people. We want an America that looks forward to a new golden age. I know people get nervous with that particular epithet there, but again, it's It's not a perfect document. I don't care for that phrase myself, but I think it means different things to different people, but it doesn't sound good. Anyway, the document says, we want people who are proud, happy, and optimistic that they will leave their country to the next generation better than they found it. So that's racist. It says, we want a gainfully employed citizenry with no one sitting on the sidelines who takes satisfaction from knowing that their work is essential to the prosperity of our nation and to the well-being of individuals and families. Now, I don't think when they use well-being, I don't think they mean what the other guys mean. They just mean for the good of individuals and families. First of all, it's not spelled the way they spell it, for one thing. Anyway, it's just a term. Now, none of this can be accomplished without growing numbers of strong, traditional families. That means one man and one woman, a mother and a father, that raise healthy children. But now, through the serpent's seductive lies in ideologies like feminism and egalitarianism that tear apart the heart of the family by sending husbands and wives off to master their personal careers every day, rather than nurturing the home and raising new Americans, the evidence for the negative impact of these kinds of ideologies can easily be seen in the self-destructive plunge in the birth rate of American citizens, which has hovered well below the replacement rate. The replacement rate, on average, each family needs to have about 2.1 children for a society to survive. Americans have been hovering around 1.6 for a while now. That means that if that were to continue, we would be no more. The most clear and present factor, that could bring an end to our society in 1 or 2 generations. It would be quick. But Trump's new national security strategy is decisively pro-family and pro-American worker, particularly, saying this, quote, American policy will be pro-worker, not merely pro-growth. Right? That is a statement against blind progressivism. American policy will be pro-worker, not merely pro-growth, and it will prioritize our own workers. We must rebuild an economy in which prosperity is broadly based and widely shared, not concentrated at the top or localized in certain industries or a few parts of our country, along with a predisposition, again, those who criticize and say that this is imperialism, the document says, along with a predisposition against entanglement in any foreign affairs, as stated in the Declaration of Independence. It continues. But the conditions in our hemisphere, which give rise to mass migration and the drug and human trafficking cartels, and which involve entanglements with hostile foreign interests right on our shores, require our intervention. Remember, the Pope said, you must not disturb Venezuela. You must have dialogue. Well, there comes a time when the dialogue's over. And as we stated in the last show, the Pope is not loyal to or committed to God. He's loyal to and committed to this Fabian socialist project. It's very clear. Now, again, to come back to our general thesis here, this is why it's necessary, ethical, and biblically justified for Trump, as commander-in-chief, to intervene, not against the poverty-stricken, starving people of Venezuela, but to remove Venezuela's neo-Marxist, anti-American, international criminal dictator, Nicolas Maduro. And that is currently on the table. For example, something Trump tweeted last week on the day that this document was released. He said, I'm dealing with, or I'm trying to stop, the poisoning of America. It's very clear what he means by that. Or, as Vice President Vance put it, and by the way, folks, just to keep it real with you here, we've criticized these guys. We criticized Vance back in August. We played that clip for you where he said, we need to seize the institutions from the left and use them against the left. We think that's just a leftist tactic. But what this strategy is saying is more correct and to the point. That's done through building up strength from within, not seizing the institutions like a dictator. Anyway, that aside, here's what Vance said 2 days before the strategy came out. We've been told for decades that the U.S. military must go everywhere and do the impossible all over the world. But the red line for permanent Washington is using the military to destroy narco-terrorists in our own hemisphere. Why narco-terrorists? Because people from the middle class are dying in numbers never seen before for a reason like this. Particularly the middle class. Young, middle class kids, young people who would be the future middle class. Of course, that's the one they would attack. So the focus of this administration, again, as stated in its official policy plan, and I'm not a cheerleader for this administration, I'm just telling you what this doctrine says and telling you what they have stated their foreign policy plan is to not meddle in the affairs of the Middle East or Asia, but to secure our more immediate threats in our own hemisphere. Maduro, for example, among others. This is identified, again, in the strategy as the Trump corollary to the Monroe Doctrine, which is essentially ending foreign wars, not being entangled in other people's wars, vastly reducing the threat of nuclear war, and the priority, ending the current brutal and senseless war between Ukraine and Russia. And you know what Europe's been doing, right? European Union leaders in Europe, they benefit from that war. So every time Trump tries to broker a peace deal or peace talks, they interfere because they don't want that war to stop. But we're racist. We're ethno-nationalists. The text of the document also chastises European leaders for their regime of censorship. So let's give credit to the people at Promethean Political Action Committee. Promethean Updates on YouTube. You can check them out. Barbara Boyd of Promethean Action, I like this quote that she gave in her report about this. She said, Europe has devolved into an Orwellian hellhole. And again, as J.D. Vance put out another quote, which I don't have up here, but it says, just Friday, which was, last week, Friday 2 weeks ago, Vance says the European Union fined X $140 million because Elon Musk refuses to ban free speech. Which I know, right, Summer? That's frustrating to hear that. We've been kicked off of X. Not really sure why. No way to get, no real way to appeal, no way to really get in front of a human being and tell them, look, we didn't do what you say we did. So whatever. And they're still taking our money from us too, but hopefully that won't last very long. Just to let you know, all is not kosher here. But we're talking about Europe, right? We're talking about the European Union here particularly. European leaders, particularly within the European Union and their dystopian Digital Services Act, describe unregulated speech, and for that matter, even thought, as the greatest security threat, an obstacle to progress. European leaders now regularly imprison their own people, particularly those who oppose their dystopian designs, for problematic social media posts, of course, thought crimes. This section of the National Security Strategy deals with this authoritarian urge and says, Europe's economic decline is eclipsed by the real and more stark prospect of civilizational erasure. It goes on to say, the larger issues facing Europe include activities of the European Union and other transnational bodies that undermine political liberty and sovereignty, migration policies that are transforming the continent and creating strife, censorship of free speech and suppression of political opposition, cratering birth rates, and loss of national identities and self-confidence. Should present trends continue, the continent will be unrecognizable in 20 years or less. Again, the strategy says we want Europe to remain European, to regain its civilizational self-confidence, and to abandon its focus on regulatory suffocation. It's difficult for me to find very much wrong with that policy. But again, it's not that the Trump administration wants to leave Europe just to fall and die. The strategy encourages American help for the people of Europe. And the way that we can help Europe is by putting up resistance to the EU's Orwellian social engineering scheme. Now, one of the main points, again, that I bring back to you, the third point, the third pillar of the four that I gave you right at the top of the show, peace through strength. The national security strategy's major external posture, how they're going to view foreign policy or how they're going to view interaction with other nations, says this specifically, quote, through maintaining peace through strength and making economic deals that favor American citizens rather than bleeding us dry. And so, the strategy says it is in the national security interest of the United States to help bring an end to these current wars. Here's the quote. Quote, we're not going to war with China. Rather, we have to de-risk our economic relationship with China. Tariffs are one way to do that. Through reshoring, bringing our industry back into America. And through fair and reciprocal trade deals. And we have to outpace China in an economic competition while protecting our trade relationships and trade routes with other Asian countries. Now, for all of this to work, of course, there are plenty of obstacles. One of the obstacles, of course, the left is one main obstacle to this coming to fruition, but then there are also rhinos, Republicans in name only, who strangely oppose this strategy. And the only reason they could oppose this strategy is because they have been bought and paid for, and they're not willing to give up what they've been or are being given by particular lobbies or whoever is funding them and giving them lots of money so they can out-campaign and keep their jobs in Washington. But for all of this to work, In other words, if we want to experience the peace and prosperity that everyone talks about missing and wanting back, you know, the America everyone claims to desire so deeply, then America's national defense will succeed or fail based on whether or not the young men and women of America's military are fully committed and willing to fight and die for this country, if you're called to defend it. But it's not just the military. It's you and me. It's all of us. It's not just up to the military. In fact, this strategy puts out a call to all American citizens to wake up, to look around you, see what's happening, see what they're doing to our inheritance of American liberty. And we have to be willing to also sacrifice for our freedom. And we do that through hard work, being willing to endure the glares and insults of the screeching mobs who've been trained against their own best interests to hate America. And we have to be willing to do uncomfortable things. As they always say, freedom is not free. But America's sovereignty is first defended at home by being well-informed, personally and actively engaged citizens. And that's what would ensure the autonomy of your local governments so that these progressive globalist gangsters can't get a foothold in your hometown or city. Now, that's the attitude that would benefit everyone. That's loving your neighbor. You know, including those of our own families, people of our own families and communities who've been programmed to believe that we're the enemy. They're listening to the wrong people. This new national security strategy is unique among all of the ones released in the last 40 years or so. And of course, it's being vehemently opposed and labeled as fascist, white nationalist by the left, and of course by America's enemies abroad also. But as you can see, if you've considered this new strategy objectively, the quotes that I've given you here tonight, I know I've given you some opinions. I haven't made it very vague on, you know, what I think of it. I don't trust everything. I'm just telling you that what's in this document, what's in this national security strategy, this particular foreign policy plan, if it were to be lived out, if it were to come to fruition, would be good for us, would be great for us. So if you've considered the text of this document here objectively, as I've presented some of it here for you tonight, if you consider it objectively apart from the media bias, apart from the pressure to hate it coming from many of our neighbors, you should also conclude that this is not imperialism, and it's not any more than it's racism or conspiracy babble. It is simply a necessary, ethical, and biblically justified America First strategy, one that many of America's founders could get behind. That's a good thing. Now, I already know. To all my black-pilled brethren, I'm not a Trumper. I'm not. I have not drunk the Kool-Aid. I've not forgotten that Washington, D.C. is one of the most corrupt places on planet Earth. I don't view Trump as a savior any more than you do. But sometimes we have to call things according to the evidence we have before us. And when have you ever seen that much effort go into removing a political opponent? There's something about Trump that makes the most committed leftists and global socialists absolutely lose their minds. They really do hate him. I make no mistake, whether you're a Trump supporter or believe the whole system is rigged beyond redemption, if you love America and believe family and traditional Christian values are good and worth fighting for, they hate you too. You don't have to sport a big red MAGA hat to understand what's really at stake today, and that this document seems to address the most important problems. The truth is, the most highly influential and effectively placed pro-America, pro-American people, anti-communist people, willing to protect Christians in America, willing to protect Africa, Christians in Africa, Christians in Europe and beyond, is DJ Trump. It's just what we've seen. You don't have to be on the Trump train to see that. You don't have to like him. It doesn't matter if you like him or not. Again, many of his policies on education and AI, for example, and healthcare are a big problem. But we have to evaluate reality on a case-by-case basis and the evidence before us soberly. And if we do that, what we see is he happens to be the guy right now with the levers of control. And he says he intends to right the ship back to a society that is not hostile to a biblical worldview. It's kind of like Nebuchadnezzar. Sometimes he's a wild animal on all fours, chewing his cud. But more often than not, lately, I know he's still got all of those wacky Paula White people around him. There's a lot of strange versions of Christianity, orbiting Trump. That's not good. But more often than not lately, he's the only person. He is the person sitting in the highest position of authority in the world who is in a position to make real changes that will help preserve the church in America, will help preserve our freedom to preach the gospel, to make disciples, our freedom to worship mostly in peace. A lot of churches are being attacked these days, but it's not as bad as it could be. It's not like Nigeria or China or North Korea. So remember what I said. Those people that hate him, they also hate you. So at the very least, we can say that, right? We can say that the same people who hate us as Christians also hate Trump. Now, surely we can afford just a little extra effort to discern the times and not overlook a backdoor blessing that God might be sending us right now through a pagan king who, like Cyrus the Great, just happens to share the same enemies as us and maybe wants to help keep us from the potential clutches of a rainbow-fisted tyranny. I wouldn't want to be so cynical that I overlooked it if that happened to be the case. So let's take a sober look at the world. Let's not be taken captive by vain philosophies and lofty opinions raised against the knowledge of God or anxious speculations of hopelessness about our inheritance of liberty. This is not about Trump. This is the thing that frustrates me sometimes about comments that come in, and anytime you talk about Donald Trump, there is a particular group of people who happen to follow a particular popular YouTuber who love to come in and just crap all over you if you just say the name, Trump. Folks, this is not about Trump. This is not even about politics. This is not a political issue. For Christians, this is a matter of faithful stewardship of God's good gifts and loving our neighbor as Jesus commanded, so that they, our neighbors too, would benefit from the grace that God pours out on his people when we are bold, fearless, and faithful. So let me finish up with this little message here, just to bring it all back home. We live in an age that is obsessed with quick fixes, instant results. We've become conditioned to expect things to be easy. We believe that it is a faithful and righteous act to withdraw from the system, to abdicate our responsibility to the Great Commission by withdrawing out of the public square. You know, we want pills to numb our sorrow. We want somebody to create a policy that erases all the hardship. People generally want someone to come along, a savior that'll fix the world for us without requiring anything from us. Even in the church, there are many who long for spiritual maturity without endurance, holiness without hardship, and want to make a cultural impact without ever engaging the culture. We tell ourselves that the battle is already lost, that retreat is wise, and silence is safe. But that's not the way God has designed this world. That's not the way of the Lord. What is? How should we think about all this? Again, it's not about Trump. It's not about politics. God has not called his people to a passive resignation. He summoned us to faith-fueled action. The Christian life is not supposed to be easy. The norm for Christianity throughout the history of the church has been persecution. We're just very fortunate at this period, if you live in America or in most places in the West, to not experience much of that, at least nothing like they experience in those places I mentioned earlier. Parts of Africa, China, North Korea. The Christian life is not a retreat to safety. Following Christ is a call to advance the kingdom of Christ in every sphere of life. We're commanded to go, to proclaim the gospel, to disciple the nations, to labor in our corner of the vineyard of culture and society, enduring the trials because the trials produce steadfastness, spiritual maturity. We've been charged with the Great Commission to make disciples of all nations, the cultural mandate to be fruitful, multiply, and take dominion, and the greatest commandment to love the Lord with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself. These are not idle suggestions that we can wait and live out when the world is safe. These are our marching orders. And they apply just the same in the middle of the storm. We have to understand that freedom, prosperity, and peace are biblical ideals. They don't flourish in a vacuum. They only grow when they're planted in the soil of righteousness, stewardship, trust, personal responsibility, self-government under God. True liberty is not lawlessness. It is ordered liberty, like we have in America, constrained and shaped by God's moral law. And it's no accident, when you look at history, that wherever Christian influence has dominated, those societies have produced trustworthy institutions, flourishing families, moral economies, and just governments. where the gospel has been rejected in the world, you find the opposite. You find coercion, corruption, brutality, and despair. You find the Soviet Union. You find socialism. Christianity is not socialism. And socialism is not compassion. Socialism is a spiritual counterfeit. It's a system that mimics the language of justice, all the while destroying the very foundations that make liberty and justice possible. Under the kind of world that the progressives want to create under socialism, the state becomes God, private property is condemned, and love is replaced by coercion or force or guilt and shame. Socialism promises equality, but only ever delivers bondage. It feigns virtue while it erodes responsibility and truth. But even now, and I know many of you think that the world is a complete mess, it's not as bad as it has been at other points in history, recent history in America. But still, even in this hour, when it seems bleak, the message I want to send home with you, there is great hope right now. God has not abandoned the world. He is at work through his church, through his people. God has set apart a people who shine as lights in the darkness. And he has not stopped raising up rulers and governments who are capable of restraining evil and protecting what is good. And this brings us to a difficult but necessary truth. Government is ordained by God. Government is not a necessary evil. Government is a divine institution. It doesn't mean it's always right. People are sinful. But as Romans 13 makes plain, civil rulers are ministers of God, appointed not to save souls, but to bear the sword. That means civil government is there to protect the innocent and punish the wicked. That's Romans 13, 1 through 4. That is the God-given charge to all governments. A government that seeks the welfare of its own people, like this strategy surely seems to do. A government that secures its borders, punishes crime. A government that seeks national flourishing, to empower its people, to make prosperity possible for its people. That kind of government is not acting in imperialism or selfish nationalism. A government that does that, or at least sets out to do that, is fulfilling the very role God designed it to perform. Can we just evaluate the world through our Christian worldview, which means the Bible is our standard of truth? Can we evaluate what we see before us according to the Bible and not according to what everyone around us thinks about the president or the vice president or the director of national intelligence or whatever? Can we just evaluate what we see in front of us through the Bible instead of through the culture? Now, this is where the biblical defense of America first as a national security principle emerges. When a leader prioritizes the safety, prosperity, and moral coherence of his own nation, whatever his personal intentions are, what he's doing is not xenophobia or imperialism. What he's doing, knowingly or not, is obedience to God's ordained order. Nations are not accidents. It's the way God has designed this world. Again, nations exist for a reason, and nations will never be done away with. Borders will always exist. I know many people can't take that one in, but until the fullness of the gospel has come in and the Lord returns, there will be nations. Nations are not accidents. They are providentially established boundaries, Acts 17:26. And rulers are accountable before God to care for their people first, just like a father must provide for his own household first. 1 Timothy 5:8. This doesn't mean refusing aid to others or retreating into isolationism, but it does mean refusing to sacrifice your own people on the altar of a globalist, socialist fantasy. A government that sends its sons to die in foreign wars while leaving its own cities in rot to crumble is not righteous. But a government that prioritizes foreign interests above its own citizens has failed its most basic duty. So, in the context I'm speaking of it, I know a lot of people use the term America First, and I haven't evaluated all the different meanings of America First, but what it means to me, it's not only a strategy. America First, in this sense, is biblical. No human government is perfect. But a national security strategy that seeks peace through strength, prosperity, through virtue, and liberty through law is far more aligned with the justice of God than one that dissolves borders, subsidizes lawlessness, and sacrifices national sovereignty for these utopian dreams. And I submit to you tonight, and you can decide for yourself, this is precisely what President Trump's 2025 national security strategy seems to be doing, or seems to aim to do, or intend to do. Again, it's not perfect. He's not perfect. No secular strategy or leader ever is. But it represents the most biblically consistent governing philosophy we've seen in at least a generation, probably longer. It doesn't propose an imperialist takeover of the world, but rather a focused, pragmatic plan to restore internal order, economic vitality, and cultural confidence. The priority of this strategy is to protect American citizens from terrorism, cartel violence, from human trafficking, from economic dependency on these hostile powers, and to protect American people from ideological subversion too, which is, has infiltrated our institutions. It's a deliberate rejection of the transnational project that seeks to erase borders, family, faith, freedom in favor of centralized, godless control. It seems to recognize that true security begins with righteous self-governance, not global technocratic entanglements. So yeah, this strategy, the response to it, makes sense because this is not what they want to hear. It frightens the globalists. They rage. Psalm 2. Why do the nations rage? Why do they conspire? A vain thing. They rage and accuse, and they call it racist, and they call it authoritarian, fascist, and many other pejoratives. But we know better. For decades, these same critics have championed the very systems that have plunged millions into dependency, broken up families, sliced up young people through these trans surgeries and poisoned them with chemicals, silenced dissent through corporate censorship and ideological conformity. Their kingdoms are built on sand, but our king reigns in righteousness. So, Christian, I'm talking to you. This is not about Trump, and it's not about politics. This is not about putting your hope in a man or even a government. It's not about waving a political banner or wearing a red MAGA hat. This is about recognizing God's providence in our moment. It's about recognizing the preservation of a society that still allows us to worship freely, speak truthfully, and raise families without fear of reprisal. Christians are not called to sit on the sidelines while the devil ravages the land. We're called to build, defend, teach, and shine. So don't grow weary. Our duty here, again, those three duties, the great commandment, the greatest commandment, love God and neighbor. The Great Commission, go therefore. Make disciples in all the nations, teaching them all that Jesus commanded us, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Let's don't forsake that. Let's engage with conviction. Let's be good stewards of God's good gifts. Let's be faithful stewards of God's good gifts. And liberty is a good gift. And let's steward this moment. Let's look at it carefully, objectively, biblically. Let's think biblically. Not for our own glory, but for the glory of the one who rules over kings and nations. Read Psalm 2. The one who establishes governments and tears them down, and who has entrusted us to the priceless gift of truth and freedom. We have the truth. Don't keep it hidden under a box. Take it out. Because there's work to do. Our hope is not lost. Christ is king, and until he returns, we have our marching orders. Press on, boldly, faithfully, and I pray joyfully. Okay, my friends. God bless you. We'll see you here again very soon.
As early as 1928, the communists declared that the racial differences among our people constituted the weakest and most vulnerable point in our social fabric. By constantly probing and straining at this one spot, they calculated that eventually the cloth could be torn apart and that Americans could be divided, weakened, and perhaps even set against each other in open combat. The average American, they say, soft and decadent. He'll become paralyzed with fear and panic. He'll run away and hide and do nothing to interfere as they strike at the community's power centers. Any all-out revolution must create a state of crisis wherein almost all of the male population would be forced to remain in their homes because of its affluence. It has waxed soft. The motive force behind its life drive is its endless pursuit of prestige, conspicuous consumption, and sensual pleasure. After the stage is properly set, America could be brought to her knees in 90 days. Ladies and gentlemen, the organization behind these preparations has almost unlimited financial resources. Our enemies are deadly serious about their task, and it's nothing short of national suicide for us to continue to ignore their plans and their progress. The strategy calls for the quiet conversion of our government. They have one and only one solution for all problems. More government, and then more and more until it's total government. In 1943, the following directive was issued from party headquarters. It read, "When certain obstructionists become too irritating, label them after suitable build-ups as fascist. Label them as fascist or Nazi or anti-Semitic, and use the prestige of anti-fascist and tolerance organizations to discredit them. In the public mind, constantly associate those who oppose us with those names which already have a bad smell. The association will, after enough repetition, become fact in the public mind."
Because I don't hate anybody. Now, I want to see every single solitary person on this earth. I want to see their soul saved. Every single solitary person. And each and every one of us that calls ourselves a Christian should pray vehemently for their souls, that we would see them in heaven and forget about all this when we get up there.